The green-skinned woman crouched at the water's edge, fingers moving through the fisherman's tangled net with the practiced efficiency of someone who had been doing this in secret for far longer than anyone knew. Lira Landry had repaired Felix Owens's nets 17 times in the past 2 years, always before dawn, always in silence, always leaving them coiled neatly on the dock where he would find them and assume the knots had simply worked themselves loose, rather than been cut by careless handling. She told herself it was neighborly kindness, the sort of thing anyone might do for someone who lived 3 doors down in the ramshackle row of cottages that hugged the north shore of Crescent Lake. She told herself it had nothing to do with the way his laugh carried across the water on summer evenings, or the careful way his long fingers shaped wood into something beautiful, or the fact that he always greeted her with the same easy warmth he showed everyone else, as if her tusks and pointed ears were no more remarkable than the color of her hair. She told herself many lies in those quiet hours before sunrise, and the truth only in the deepest privacy of her own thoughts. The net came free of its snarl, and she began working on the tiers, her needle flashing in the pre-dawn light. Summer was shifting toward autumn now, the air carrying that particular coolness that meant the fishing season would end soon, and Felix would spend more time in the boatyard where he had apprenticed himself 3 seasons back. She had watched him learn that trade the way she watched everything about him, from a careful distance, cataloging each detail like a scholar might study a rare text. Lira had arrived in Crescent Harbor 4 years ago with nothing but a pack, her tools, and a reputation that preceded her by 3 towns. Orc woman, traveling alone, taking whatever work she could find. The other orcs in the region lived in their own settlements up in the hills, keeping to themselves, trading but never truly mixing. She had left for reasons she rarely explained, and the humans of Crescent Harbor had accepted her presence with the wary tolerance they might show a useful but potentially dangerous animal. She fixed things she kept to herself. She worked harder than anyone else, and gradually they had stopped crossing the street when they saw her coming. But acceptance was not belonging, and tolerance was not affection, and in 2 years she had never found the courage to tell Felix Owens that she loved him with an intensity that sometimes frightened her. She finished the last knot and coiled the net, setting it precisely where he would find it. Then she gathered her own fishing gear and her small boat, pushing off into the lake as the first true light broke over the eastern hills. The water was glass smooth, reflecting the pink and gold of the sunrise, and she rowed out to her usual spot with strong, even strokes that barely disturbed the surface. Felix would be waking now in his cottage, brewing the bitter tea he favored, probably singing something off-key as he moved around the small space. She had heard him through the walls often enough to know his morning routine as well as her own. He would find the net, shake his head in that bemused way he had, and then head down to the docks to check his lines before spending the afternoon at the boatyard. Their paths would cross, as they always did, and she would nod and he would grin and make some joke, and she would feel the familiar ache of wanting something she could never have. The fish were biting well that morning, perhaps sensing the changing season. Lira worked methodically, her hands sure on the line, her mind wandering where it always wandered these days. She had saved a fair amount of money over the years, living simply, spending little. She had thought about opening her own shop, maybe a repair business, but had never quite taken the leap. Crescent Harbor was peaceful, and she had grown to love the lake, the rhythm of the water, the way the seasons turned here with a gentle inevitability. And she loved him, which was the root of everything else. By the time she rowed back to shore, the sun was fully up and the docks were busy with the morning's activity. She tied off her boat and began sorting her catch, setting aside the best specimens as she always did. Pike, bass, a few perch, all good size. She kept what she needed for herself and put the rest in her basket to sell at the market, except for the largest pike, easily 4 pounds of silver muscle and predatory grace. That one she wrapped carefully in cloth and set in a separate basket. Lira, that is a magnificent fish. She looked up to find Felix standing 3 feet away, his own basket in hand, his brown hair falling into his hazel eyes the way it always did when he forgot to tie it back. He was lean and wiry, all tendon and bone and nervous energy, with the kind of face that was more interesting than handsome, full of character and humor. He wore his usual work clothes, canvas trousers and a loose shirt, both spattered with wood shavings and old paint. "Thank you," she managed, her voice coming out rougher than she intended. She cleared her throat. "The morning was good. I can see that." He set his own basket down and leaned against the dock post, all casual grace. "Found my net all fixed up again this morning. Strangest thing. 3rd time this month something like that has happened. Either I have a guardian spirit watching over me, or the lake itself has decided to be kind." Lira focused on her sorting, not meeting his eyes. "Perhaps you are just fortunate. Perhaps." There was something in his voice, a note she could not quite identify. Or perhaps someone is being extraordinarily kind and will not take credit for it. Her hand stilled on the fish. She had been so careful, always working before dawn, never leaving any sign. "I do not know what you mean." "No, I suppose you do not." He was quiet for a moment and she could feel his gaze on her, thoughtful and considering. "Are you heading to the market?" "Yes, to sell the catch. Mind if I walk with you? I have some things to sell as well, and I wanted to ask you something." Her heart did something complicated in her chest, a twist that was half hope and half fear. "Of course." They gathered their baskets and started up the dock toward the town proper, falling into step beside each other. Felix was perhaps 2 inches taller than her, which made him average height for a human man and put them nearly eye to eye. She had always appreciated that about walking with him, the way she did not have to crane her neck or look down, the easy equality of it. "How is the apprenticeship going?" she asked, because it was safe conversation, the kind they always had. "Well enough. Gideon says I have a good hand for the detail work, which is kind since what he means is I am not strong enough for the heavy timber shaping." He said it with cheerful self-deprecation, no bitterness in it. "But I like the careful parts, the way everything has to fit just so, the problem-solving of it. And I like being on the water, even if I am just building the things that go on it rather than sailing them." "You are good at it," Lira said quietly. "I have seen the rowboat you finished last month." The lines were very fine. He glanced at her, surprised and pleased. "You notice that?" "I notice many things." They reached the market square, which was filling with the usual morning crowd. Humans mostly. A few dwarves who came down from the mountain settlements to trade. One elderly halfling woman who sold herbs and simples. Lira set up at her usual spot, laying out her fish on the wooden board she brought for the purpose. Felix settled beside her, arranging his own smaller catch and a few carved wooden items he made in his spare time, little decorative pieces that sold well to travelers. The morning passed in the comfortable rhythm of commerce. Lira sold her fish quickly, as she always did, her prices fair and her catch always fresh. She watched from the corner of her eye as Felix charmed customers with easy banter, making them laugh, turning a simple transaction into a moment of connection. He had a gift for that, for making people feel seen and valued, and she thought it must be a kind of magic all its own. When the last of her fish were sold, she carefully lifted the wrapped pike from her separate basket. She had done this 30 times or more over the past 2 years, always the same ritual. She would wait until Felix was distracted, slip the package beside his things, and disappear before he noticed. He would find it, express surprise and delight to the empty air, and take it home, never knowing where it came from. She waited for her moment, watching as he turned to help an elderly woman examine one of his carvings. Lira. She froze, the package in her hands. Felix was looking directly at her, the elderly woman forgotten. His expression was gentle, knowing, and something else she could not name. "Is that for me?" There was no point in denying it now. She held out the wrapped pike, feeling heat rise in her cheeks, grateful that her green skin hid any blush. "You should have it. It is the best of the catch." He took it carefully, his fingers brushing hers in the exchange, and she felt that touch like a spark all the way through her. "You have been leaving me fish for 2 years. It was not a question, but she answered anyway. "Yes. And mending my nets." "Yes." Why? The question was asked softly, without judgment, but it hit her like a blow nonetheless. She scrambled for an answer that was not the truth, not the raw, vulnerable truth that would ruin everything. "You are my neighbor. It is what neighbors do. Neighbors do not give away their best catch every week. Neighbors do not spend hours repairing nets in the dark." He set the package down carefully and stepped closer, his eyes searching her face. "Lira, why?" She could not do this, could not stand here in the market square and admit the feelings she had guarded so carefully for so long. "I should go. I have work waiting." "Wait." His hand caught her wrist, gentle but firm. "Please. I have something to ask you, and I have been trying to find the courage for weeks now, and if I do not ask now, I think I never will." Her breath caught. His hand was warm on her wrist, his expression earnest and vulnerable in a way she had never seen before. "What is it?" He released her wrist but did not step back, holding her gaze with his own. "I want to start my own boatworks. Not just building for Gideon anymore, but my own shop, my own designs. I have been saving for 3 years, and I have enough to lease the old Whitley property down by the South Dock, the one with the good work shed and the waterfront access. But I need a partner, someone I trust, someone who knows the water and the work and has the skills to help me build something real." She stared at him, not understanding. "There are many people who could do that, but I am not asking them. I am asking you." He took a breath, and she saw his hands were shaking slightly. "Lira, I am asking you to go into business with me. Equal partners, equal investment, equal share of everything we build. The business would be in both our names." The world seemed to tilt slightly. Of all the things she had imagined he might say, this had never occurred to her. "Why me?" "Because you are the hardest worker I have ever met. Because you understand boats and water and the way things fit together. Because you are honest and careful and you see problems before they happen." He paused, and something shifted in his expression, became softer and more raw. "And because I trust you more than anyone else in this town, and I think maybe you trust me too, even if you have never said so." Lira felt as if she were standing on the edge of a cliff, looking down into unknown depths. A business partnership meant working together every day, meant binding their reputations and fortunes together, meant stepping into the kind of visibility she had always avoided. It meant risk and exposure and all the things she had taught herself to fear. It also meant being near him, being part of his life in a real and tangible way, building something together. "I would need to invest money," she said slowly, testing the shape of the possibility. "Yes. Half the lease, half the tools and materials. I have the numbers worked out if you want to see them." He pulled a folded paper from his pocket, worn soft from handling. "I have been carrying this around for 2 months, waiting for the right moment to ask you." She took the paper, unfolding it to find neat columns of figures, expenses, and projected income, all written in Felix's careful hand. The numbers were reasonable, conservative even, and the amount he was asking her to invest was substantial but not impossible. She had that much saved and a little more. "Why have you waited 2 months?" he laughed, a short self-deprecating sound. "Because I was afraid you would say no. Because I was not sure if you even liked me enough to want to work together. Because every time I started to ask, I would see you and forget every reasonable thing I meant to say." She looked up from the paper, her heart pounding. "You were afraid I would say no. Terrified." He met her eyes, unflinching. "Lira, I know I am not the most sensible business partner. I am too impulsive, too optimistic, probably too ambitious for my own good. But I think we could build something extraordinary together. I think we could make boats that people would talk about, the kind that last generations. And I think—" He faltered, then pushed forward. "I think you deserve to have someone believe in you the way you have been believing in everyone else." The words landed like arrows, each one finding some undefended part of her heart. She wanted to say yes immediately, to leap at the chance to be part of his dream, but caution held her back. "The Whitley property lease, is it secure? For now, but there is a complication." He rubbed the back of his neck, a nervous gesture. "A merchant from Redcliffe, a man named Horace Brennan, has been trying to buy the property outright. He wants to build a warehouse there, something for his shipping business. He has offered Whitley twice what the land is worth, but the old man does not want to sell, just lease. He likes the idea of a boat works there, says it suits the location better than a warehouse. But if this Brennan offers enough money, Whitley might change his mind. Yes, which means we would need to secure the lease quickly and prove we can make a success of it." Felix's expression was serious now, the levity gone. "I will not lie to you, Lira. This is a risk. If Brennan outbids us, or if we cannot make the business profitable quickly enough, we could lose everything we invest. That is why I need a partner I trust absolutely. Someone who will work as hard as I will to make this succeed." She looked down at the paper again, at the neat columns of numbers that represented a possible future. A partnership meant more than money and labor. It meant her name on the business, her reputation tied to his, the whole town knowing they had chosen to work together. For an orc woman and a human man to enter into that kind of agreement would raise eyebrows at the very least, and there would be those who would oppose it simply out of prejudice. But underneath all of that, she heard what he had not quite said, felt it in the way he looked at her, the vulnerability in his voice. This was not just about business. This was about trust and connection and the hope that she might feel something of what he felt. And she did. She felt so much it terrified her. "Can I think about it?" she asked, hating the caution in her own voice but unable to silence it. "This is a large decision." Something flickered in his eyes, disappointment perhaps, but he nodded. "Of course. Take whatever time you need. I know it is a lot to ask." She folded the paper carefully and handed it back to him. "Keep this. I know the numbers now. Will you at least take the fish?" He picked up the wrapped pike, holding it out with a small, tentative smile. "Since I know where it came from now, and I know it was meant for me." She took it, clutching it to her chest like armor. "Yes, thank you for asking me, Felix. I am honored that you thought of me." "You are the only person I thought of," he said quietly. "There was never anyone else." She fled before she could do something foolish like cry, or worse, say yes without thinking it through. She made her way back to her cottage and spent the afternoon in a daze, mechanically going through her usual tasks while her mind spun in circles. A partnership with Felix Owens. Her name on a business beside his. Every day working together, building boats, shaping wood, creating something that would outlast them both. It was everything she wanted and everything she feared, all tangled together in a knot she did not know how to untie. That evening she sat on her small porch overlooking the lake and tried to think rationally about the decision. The business case was sound. Felix was right that the location was good, and there was demand for quality boat building in Crescent Harbor. The town sat at the convergence of 3 trade routes and the fishing industry was strong. A well-run boatworks could thrive here, but the merchant from Redcliffe was a real threat. If Horace Brennan truly wanted the land, he had resources they could not match. And if they entered into the lease and then lost it, she would lose her savings and Felix would lose his dream. More than that, she would be binding herself to him in a way that made her feelings impossible to hide. How could she work beside him every day, share the triumphs and struggles of building a business, and not reveal the truth of what she felt? How long could she maintain the pretense that this was only about commerce and craft? The sun set over the lake in shades of amber and rose, and still she had no answer. She did not see Felix the next day, or the day after that. She went about her work with mechanical efficiency, fishing in the early mornings, taking on odd repair jobs in the afternoons, trying not to think about the question that hung between them. But everywhere she looked in the small town, she saw reminders. The dock where they had stood, the market square where he had asked, the boatyard where he still worked for Gideon, learning his craft. On the 3rd day, she was walking past the old Whitley property, unable to help herself, and found Felix there with an older man she recognized as Samuel Whitley himself. They were standing by the work shed, and Whitley was gesturing at the building with evident pride. She should have kept walking, but something made her stop, made her stand there in the road and watch. Felix saw her almost immediately. Their eyes met across the distance, and she saw hope flare in his expression, quickly tempered with uncertainty. He said something to Whitley, then started toward her, crossing the weedy yard with his long, easy stride. "Lira." He stopped a few feet away, giving her space. "I was hoping I would see you. I was walking past." It was a weak excuse, and they both knew it. "Whitley is showing me the property again. He wants an answer soon about the lease." Felix glanced back at the older man who was watching them with frank curiosity. "Brennan has increased his offer again. Whitley is holding firm for now, but I do not know how much longer that will last." "You should take it," Lira heard herself say. "The lease. You should take it even without a partner." His expression shuddered. "I told you I need a partner I trust. If you do not want to do it, I understand, but I am not going to rush into an arrangement with someone else just to meet a deadline. Felix, you have been planning this for 3 years. You cannot let it go because I am too much of a coward to say yes." "You are not a coward." He said it with such conviction that she almost believed him. "You are cautious, which is sensible, and you have more to lose than I do." "What does that mean?" He looked at her steadily. "You know what it means. An orc woman going into business with a human man, putting her name on a sign beside his. There will be talk, maybe worse than talk. I am asking you to make yourself visible in a way you have spent years avoiding, and I know that. If you decide it is not worth the risk, I will not blame you." The understanding in his voice was almost harder to bear than anger would have been. She wanted him to push, to argue, to make the decision easier by being unreasonable. Instead, he was giving her every out, every excuse, and somehow that made it impossible to take any of them. "I do not want you to lose your dream because of me," she said, the words scraped raw. "And I do not want you to sacrifice your peace because of me." He took a step closer, his voice dropping. "Lira, I have to tell you something, and I should have told you days ago, but I was trying to be strategic about it, and that was foolish. This is not just about business for me." Her heart stopped, then started again too fast. "I have been watching you for 2 years," Felix continued, the words tumbling out now as if a dam had broken. "I have been leaving my nets where you would find them on purpose, hoping you would mend them. I have been fishing near you even when the fish were better elsewhere, just to be close. I have been making excuses to walk past your cottage and hoping you would be outside. And when I decided to start this boat works, you were the first person I thought of, not because of your skills, although those matter, but because I wanted a reason to be near you every day. Because I wanted to build something with you specifically. Because I have been in love with you for so long I cannot remember what it felt like before." She could not breathe, could not move, could not process what she was hearing. "So if you say no," he said, his voice shaking now, "I will accept it, and I will never mention this again, and we can go back to being cordial neighbors who nod at each other on the docks. But I had to tell you the truth. I had to let you know that when I asked you to be my partner, I was asking for so much more than just business. I was asking if you might feel even a fraction of what I feel, and if you might be willing to take the chance of finding out." Lira stared at him, this lean, playful man who built beautiful things with his hands, who had somehow looked at her and seen something worth loving. "You have been in love with me for 2 years. Yes, and you never said anything. Neither did you." He said it gently, without accusation. "I saw you leaving the fish, Lira. I saw you fixing my nets. I saw the way you would glance at me when you thought I was not looking. And I hoped, but I did not know, and I was too afraid of being wrong to risk it." "I have loved you for 2 years," she said, the confession ripping out of her. "I have loved you and thought it was impossible and tried to be content with just being near you sometimes. I never imagined you might feel the same." The joy that broke across his face was like sunrise. "You love me. Yes, you impossible man, I love you." He laughed, bright and disbelieving, and closed the distance between them, his hands coming up to frame her face. "Can I kiss you?" "Yes." He kissed her there in the weedy yard of the Whitley property, tender and careful as if she were something precious. She kissed him back with 2 years of longing behind it, her hands fisting in his shirt, feeling the solid reality of him against her finally real. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. "Is that a yes to the partnership too?" She laughed, shaky and overwhelmed. "I need to see those numbers again. Practical even now." But his eyes were dancing. "Come on, Whitley is still waiting, and if we are going to do this, we should do it properly." They walked back to the property together, and this time when Felix introduced her to Samuel Whitley, he did it with their hands clasped together, pride evident in every line of his body. Whitley looked at their joined hands, then at their faces, and his weathered face creased into a grin. "About time," the old man said. "Whole town has been waiting for you two to figure it out." "The whole town knew?" Lira asked, mortified. "Everyone with eyes knew," Whitley said cheerfully. "The way you two danced around each other, it was painful to watch. So are you here about the lease?" Felix looked at her, and she saw the question in his eyes, the hope and vulnerability. She thought about the risk, the exposure, the potential for failure and loss. She thought about the merchant from Redcliffe and his money, about the prejudice they would face, about all the ways this could go wrong. Then she thought about Felix's hands shaping wood, about morning light on the lake, about building something that would last. She thought about working beside him every day, about the partnership they could forge, about choosing hope over fear. "Yes," she said firmly, "we are here about the lease." They spent the next hour going over the details with Whitley. The lease was for 5 years with an option to purchase at the end if they wanted. The monthly payment was steep but not impossible, and it included the work shed, the waterfront access, and a small office space in the building. Whitley wanted first and last month up front, plus a deposit, and he wanted to see a solid business plan. "I do not want Brennan's money," Whitley said bluntly, but I also do not want to lease to someone who will fail in 6 months and leave me scrambling. You two prove you can make this work, and the property is yours for as long as you want it." Felix showed him the plans he had drawn up, the projected income and expenses, the list of potential clients he had already been cultivating. Lira added her own observations about the fishing fleet's needs, about the trade boats that came through, about repairs and maintenance that could provide steady income while they built the business. Whitley listened, asked shrewd questions, and finally nodded. "All right, you have a deal. I will draw up the lease papers and have them ready by the end of the week. You two have that time to get your finances in order and make sure this is really what you want." They left the property in a daze of excitement and terror. Felix kept looking at her as if he could not quite believe she was real, and she felt the same way about him. They ended up back at the docks, sitting on the edge with their feet dangling over the water, watching the afternoon light dance on the waves. "I cannot believe this is happening," Felix said. "This morning I thought I would have to give up the dream or find another partner, or just accept that I would never have the courage to tell you how I felt. And now we are going into business together and you love me. It feels like something from a story. Stories do not usually involve merchant competition and lease negotiations," Lira pointed out, but she was smiling. "The best ones do." He took her hand again, lacing their fingers together. "Are you scared?" "Terrified," she admitted. "Of the business failing, of Brennan outbidding us somehow, of the town deciding they do not want an orc woman with her name on a business, of losing everything I have saved, of disappointing you. You could never disappoint me." He squeezed her hand. "But I am scared too. I am scared of making a mistake that costs us the business, of letting you down, of not being good enough at this to make it work. But I think being scared and doing it anyway is better than being safe and always wondering what might have been." She leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling the warmth of him, the solid reality. "When did you fall in love with me?" "The first week you arrived in town," he said without hesitation. "You came to the docks looking for work, and everyone was giving you a wide berth, and you just stood there looking so fierce and proud and desperately trying not to show that you were lonely. And then you asked if anyone needed nets mended, and your voice was so careful, so formal, and I thought you were the bravest person I had ever seen. I was lost from that moment. I thought you were too cheerful to be real," Lira confessed. "I thought no one could actually be that warm and friendly to everyone. I thought it must be a performance. It took me months to realize that is just who you are, that your kindness is genuine." "I am not kind to everyone," Felix said. "I am cordial, I am friendly, but kind is different. Kind is fixing someone's nets in the dark. Kind is giving away your best fish every week. Kind is what you are, Lira." They sat there as the sun sank lower, making plans and dreaming aloud. They would need to order materials, hire at least one more person to help with the heavy work, start spreading word that the boatworks was opening. Felix had some clients already interested, fishermen who wanted custom boats, a merchant who needed a barge repaired. Lira thought they could offer maintenance contracts to the fishing fleet, steady income that would keep them afloat while they built reputation. The week that followed was a blur of activity. Lira went to the bank and withdrew her savings, feeling the weight of the decision in the heft of the coin purse. Felix gathered his own funds, counting and recounting to make sure he had enough. They met with Whitley and signed the lease papers, their signatures side by side on the document, making it real and legal and terrifying. The news spread through town with the speed of wildfire. An orc woman and a human man going into business together, equal partners, both their names on the deed. The reactions were mixed. Some people were openly supportive, congratulating them and promising to bring business their way. Others were skeptical, doubting that an orc could be a legitimate business owner, questioning whether the arrangement was proper. A few were hostile, muttering about unnatural partnerships and the degradation of human standards. Felix handled it all with his usual easy charm, thanking the supporters and ignoring the detractors. Lira tried to follow his example, but each hostile glare, each muttered comment felt like a physical blow. She had spent years making herself small, avoiding attention, and now she was at the center of town gossip. "Do not let them get to you," Felix said one evening as they worked to clear out the shed, hauling away years of accumulated junk. "They will talk no matter what we do. Let them talk. We will prove them wrong by succeeding. And if we do not succeed, then we fail spectacularly, and at least we will have tried." He grinned at her over a stack of old crates. "Besides, I have faith in us. We are going to build boats that make people weep with envy." His confidence was infectious, and despite her fears, Lira found herself beginning to believe. They worked from dawn until dusk, cleaning and organizing the shed, setting up workbenches, ordering tools and materials. Felix's old master, Gideon, gave them a generous discount on some used equipment, and several other craftspeople in town offered advice and supplies. But alongside the support came the pressure. 3 weeks into their lease, Horace Brennan himself showed up at the property. He was a heavy man in expensive clothes, with the kind of face that suggested he was used to getting his way. He looked around the work shed with barely concealed disdain, then fixed his gaze on Felix and Lira. "I hear you are the ones who outbid me for this property," he said without preamble. "We did not outbid you," Felix replied evenly. "We signed a lease. Whitley did not want to sell. Everything is for sale at the right price." Brennan's eyes moved to Lira, and she saw the calculation there, the dismissal. "I am prepared to offer you compensation for breaking your lease, enough to cover what you have invested and a bit more for your trouble. You would walk away with a profit and I would get the land I need." "We are not interested," Lira said flatly. "You have not heard my offer yet. We do not need to. This is our business and we are not selling." She held his gaze, refusing to back down despite the way her heart was pounding. Brennan's expression hardened. "You are making a mistake. This town does not need another boatworks, and it certainly does not need one run by a human and an orc playing at partnership. You will fail within a year, and when you do, I will still be here, ready to take this property off Whitley's hands." "Then you will be waiting a long time," Felix said, his voice harder than Lira had ever heard it. "We are not going anywhere, and we are not intimidated by threats disguised as offers. This is our land, our business, and you need to leave." Brennan looked between them, clearly reassessing. "Fine, but when you come crawling back looking for a buyer, do not expect me to be so generous." He turned and left, his expensive boots crunching on the gravel. When he was gone, Lira let out a shaky breath. "That was terrifying." "That was you being magnificent," Felix said, pulling her into a hug. "Did you see his face when you told him we were not interested? I thought he might explode." "He is going to make trouble for us, probably, but we will handle it, together." He kissed the top of her head, and she let herself lean into him, drawing strength from his certainty. They threw themselves into the work with renewed determination. The first boat they planned to build was a fishing vessel for a local man named Thomas Raid, who had been saving for years to replace his aging craft. He had approached Felix months ago, impressed by the smaller boats Felix had built under Gideon's supervision, and he was willing to take a chance on the new boatworks. "She needs to be 16 feet, stable in rough water with good storage for the catch," Thomas explained, sitting in the small office space they had cleaned out. "Nothing fancy but solid. A boat that will last my lifetime and maybe my son's after that." Felix sketched as they talked, his pencil moving quickly over the paper, translating words into lines and curves. Lira added her own input, talking about weight distribution and the way the lake's currents moved, the kind of conditions the boat would face. Together, they designed something that was more than either of them could have created alone, a synthesis of Felix's eye for beauty and Lira's practical understanding of how boats actually worked on the water. When they showed Thomas the final design, his face lit up. "That is exactly what I need." "When can you start?" "Immediately," Felix said. "We will have her ready in 6 weeks." 6 weeks. It was an aggressive timeline, but not impossible. They ordered the timber, selected pieces with care, rejecting anything that was not perfect. Then they began the work in earnest, falling into a rhythm that felt as natural as breathing. Felix handled the fine work, shaping the ribs and planking with patient precision. Lira did the heavy assembly, her strength and endurance allowing her to work for hours without tiring. They consulted on every decision, caught each other's mistakes, pushed each other to do better. And in the evenings, when the light grew too dim to work safely, they would sit on the dock outside the shed and eat whatever simple meal they had thrown together, talking about everything and nothing. Felix told her about growing up in a fishing family, about the brother he had lost to the sea, about why he had chosen building over sailing. Lira told him about the orc settlement she had left, about the rigid traditions that had felt like a cage, about the loneliness of the past 4 years, and the slow building of a life in Crescent Harbor. "I never felt like I belonged here," she admitted one evening, watching the stars come out over the water. "Not truly. I was tolerated, maybe accepted in a distant way, but never really part of things." "And now," Felix asked quietly, "now I feel like I am building something that matters. Like I have a stake in this place, not just a temporary berth." She looked at him, at the way the starlight caught in his eyes. "You make me feel like I belong. You do belong, you always did. The town just needed time to see it." He took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "And I need you to know that whatever happens with the business, whether we succeed or fail, you belong with me. That part is not contingent on anything else." She kissed him then, deep and fervent, trying to convey everything she felt and could not quite put into words. He responded with equal intensity, his hands tangling in her hair, and for a while there was nothing but the two of them and the star-filled night. The weeks passed in a haze of sawdust and sweat and slowly growing confidence. The boat took shape under their hands, transforming from raw timber into something graceful and purposeful. They worked 12 and 14-hour days, falling into bed exhausted and waking eager to return to the work. Other people started stopping by to watch their progress. Some were genuine well-wishers. Others were clearly skeptics waiting to see them fail. Gideon came by once a week to offer advice and critique, his gruff manner hiding an obvious affection for his former apprentice. Thomas Reid visited almost daily, unable to contain his excitement as he watched his boat come to life. And through it all, Horace Brennan remained a lurking presence. They would see him sometimes, driving past in his expensive carriage, watching the work shed with calculating eyes. He approached Whitley twice more with increased offers, but the old man held firm. Still, the pressure was there, the constant awareness that if they failed, Brennan would be waiting to take what they had built. 5 weeks in, with a week left before their deadline, disaster nearly struck. Felix was working on the finishing details of the interior, and Lira was outside treating the hull with waterproofing compound when a group of young men appeared at the edge of the property. She recognized 2 of them as day laborers from the shipping docks, the kind of men who hired themselves out for whatever work they could find. Heard this place is run by an orc now, one of them called out, loud enough that Felix would hear from inside the shed. That cannot be legal, can it? Orcs owning property, Lira straightened, setting down her brush with deliberate care. I do not own the property, I lease it in partnership with Felix Owens, and yes, it is entirely legal. Partnership. Another man laughed. That what you are calling it? Everyone knows orcs do not have the brains for business. You are probably just his servant, doing the grunt work while he takes credit. She had heard worse over the years, had learned to let such comments roll off her like water. But something about the timing, the way they stood at the edge of the property like a pack of predators testing a boundary, set her teeth on edge. You need to leave. This is private property. We are just standing on the road, green skin. No law against that. The first man grinned, mean and taunting. Though maybe there should be a law against your kind pretending to be civilized, playing at business like you are real people. Felix emerged from the shed, his expression thunderous. You need to leave now. Or what? You going to defend your pet orc? That is unnatural, Owens. A man should have more pride than to work beside a monster. Careful, Felix said, his voice low and dangerous. You are about to say something you will really regret. What are you going to do, fight all three of us? You are built like a scarecrow. We could break you in half. Lira moved before she could think, putting herself between Felix and the men. No one is fighting anyone. You are going to turn around and leave, and we are going to forget this conversation happened. Hiding behind your orc, the leader of the group laughed. That is even more pathetic. I am not hiding behind anyone, Felix said, moving to stand beside Lira, not behind her. And Lira is right, you are going to leave. But first you are going to understand something. This business is ours, equal partnership, both our names on every document. She is not my servant or my pet or anything else except my partner and the woman I love. And if you have a problem with that, if you want to make trouble, then you will be dealing with both of us together, and I promise you that will go worse for you than you can imagine. Something in his tone, or perhaps in the way they stood united, made the men reconsider. The leader spat on the ground, a final gesture of contempt, but they started backing away. Unnatural, he muttered. You will get what is coming to you, both of you. They left, but the encounter rattled Lira more than she wanted to admit. When they were alone again, she turned to Felix. This is what I was afraid of. This is what happens when an orc steps out of her place. They were just drunk idiots trying to feel important. But his jaw was tight with anger. And they do not get to define your place, Lira. You decide that. I have put you at risk. The realization sat heavy in her chest. Your reputation, your business. If people think you are too closely associated with me, it could ruin you. Let it. He took her shoulders, making her look at him. I do not want a reputation built on prejudice and hate. I do not want a business that only succeeds if I distance myself from you. We are in this together, remember, both our names on the sign. That was the whole point. Felix, no. Listen to me. I love you. That is not contingent on whether it is convenient or socially acceptable. That is just the truth. And if the town cannot handle that, then maybe we will have to find another town. But I am not giving you up, and I am not pretending we are anything other than what we are. Partners. In business and in everything else. She wanted to argue, to tell him he was being foolishly idealistic, but the conviction in his eyes stopped her. He meant every word, would defend her against the whole world if necessary, and the knowledge of that was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. I love you too, she said instead, even when you are being ridiculous, especially when I am being ridiculous. He kissed her, fierce and claiming, then stepped back with visible effort. Come on, we have a boat to finish and only a week to do it. Let them talk. We will answer with our work. They threw themselves back into the project with renewed focus. The incident with the young men bothered Lira, but Felix was right that their work would speak louder than any words. They labored through the final week with single-minded determination, sleeping only a few hours each night, pushing through exhaustion and doubt. And then, 6 weeks to the day from when they started, the boat was finished. She was beautiful, 16 feet of smooth lines and perfect joinery, every plank fitted with care, every detail considered. They had named her Starling after the small birds that flocked to the lake each spring and painted the name on her bow in neat letters. Thomas Reed stood beside the boat with tears in his eyes, running his hands over the wood with the reverence of a man receiving a sacred gift. "She is perfect," he said, his voice rough. "Better than I imagined, better than I had any right to expect from a brand new boatworks." "She is solid," Felix said with quiet pride. "She will serve you well for decades if you maintain her properly." They launched Starling that afternoon with half the town watching from the docks. Lira had been dreading the public display, the scrutiny, but when the boat touched the water and floated true and stable, she felt nothing but pride. This was their work, hers and Felix's together, and it was good. Thomas took her out for a test run, rowing out into the lake and back, testing her handling and balance. When he returned to the dock, he was grinning from ear to ear. "She is magnificent, best money I have ever spent. You two are going to have more business than you can handle once word gets out about this." He paid them in full, the first real income the business had generated, and they stood there holding the money and grinning at each other like fools. "We did it," Felix said, wonder in his voice. "We actually did it. We built one boat," Lira cautioned, but she could not stop smiling. "We have a long way to go before we can call this a success. Let me have this moment," he pleaded. "Let me celebrate the fact that we built something beautiful together and did it well. Tomorrow we can worry about the next project." That night, they had a small celebration in the office space, just the two of them, and a bottle of wine that Gideon had given them as a congratulations gift. They sat on the floor with their backs against the wall, pleasantly tired and slightly drunk, talking about the future. "We need to make a sign," Felix said, gesturing vaguely at the space above the door. "Something carved, really beautiful, both our names so everyone knows this is a partnership." "Owens and Landry Boatworks," Lira said, testing the sound of it. "Or Landry and Owens," Felix suggested. "Alphabetical order." "No, your name first. This was your dream first, our dream now." He took her hand, lacing their fingers together in the gesture that had become habitual between them. "Lira, there is something I need to ask you, and I have been trying to find the right moment, but I do not think there is such a thing as a right moment, so I am just going to ask." Her heart started beating faster. "What is it?" He set down his wine and shifted to face her more fully. "We have been together for 6 weeks now. Technically 7 if you count the week before we signed the lease. That is not very long in the grand scheme of things, and most people would say we are rushing, and maybe we are. But I have loved you for 2 years, and I think you have loved me just as long, and I do not see the point in waiting when I already know what I want. Felix." She hardly dared to breathe. "Marry me." He said it simply, without flourish, his eyes steady on hers. "Be my partner in everything, not just business. Let me stand beside you for the rest of our lives and build 1,000 boats and a home and whatever else we can dream up. Say yes." She had imagined this moment in the secret places of her heart, but had never truly believed it would come. An orc woman and a human man, married openly, binding their lives together. It would cause scandal, would cement all the gossip and suspicion that already swirled around them. There would be those who would never accept it, who would always see their union as something unnatural. But there would also be those who would celebrate with them, who would see what she saw when she looked at Felix, a good man with a generous heart and skilled hands and a dream big enough for both of them. And more than any of that, there would be the two of them together, facing whatever came. "Yes," she said, the word breaking free like something that had been caged too long. "Yes, I will marry you." His smile was incandescent. He kissed her then, deep and slow, his hands cradling her face as if she were precious beyond measure. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, he pressed his forehead to hers. "I do not have a ring yet. I should have planned this better." "I do not need a ring," she laughed, giddy and overwhelmed. "I just need you. You have me. You have had me since the day you walked onto the docks looking fierce and proud. I just did not have the courage to say so until now." They spent that night planning a future that suddenly seemed full of possibilities. A small wedding, they decided, just close friends and family. Felix's parents lived 2 towns over and would come, though they would likely have reservations. Lira had no family to invite, having left her clan years ago, but there were people in Crescent Harbor who had become something like Family Gideon, Old Whitley, Thomas Reed, a few others who had shown them kindness. The next morning they began work on their second commission, a repair job for a merchant barge that needed its hull reinforced. It was less glamorous than building a new vessel, but it paid well and would keep them busy for several weeks. Word had indeed started to spread about the quality of their work, and they had 3 more projects lined up after the barge. A week after the proposal, Felix took Lira to meet his parents. They traveled to the coastal town of Fairhaven, where his mother and father ran a small inn near the docks. The meeting was tense at first, his parents clearly uncertain about their son's choice, but Felix's mother had a kind heart beneath her worry, and his father was willing to reserve judgment until he saw them together. "You make him happy," his mother said to Lira, pulling her aside after dinner. "I can see that, and he seems more settled, more sure of himself than I have ever seen him. So whatever my reservations, whatever concerns I might have, that matters more. I love him," Lira said simply. "I will spend my life making sure he knows that. Then that is enough for me." His mother smiled, tentative but genuine. "Welcome to the family, Lira." They returned to Crescent Harbor with Felix's parents' blessing and began planning the wedding in earnest. They decided to hold it at the boatworks, on the dock where they had spent so many evenings talking and dreaming. It would be simple, just vows exchanged at sunset with their few guests as witnesses, followed by a meal at the town tavern. But as the date approached, Horace Brennan made his move. He filed a formal complaint with the town council, claiming that the boatworks was in violation of several municipal codes, noise ordinances, waterfront access regulations, business licensing requirements. The claims were technical and largely spurious, but they required time and money to fight, and in the meantime, the council issued a temporary suspension of their business license pending investigation. "He is trying to bleed us dry," Felix said, staring at the legal documents with barely contained fury. "Force us to spend our savings on lawyers and fees until we cannot afford to keep the lease." Lira read through the complaints with a sinking heart. They could fight this, probably even win, but it would take months and cost money they did not have to spare, and in the meantime, they could not take on new work, which meant no income. "What do? We fight." Felix's jaw was set with determination. "We find a lawyer, we contest every single claim, and we prove that we have done nothing wrong. And when we win, we make sure everyone knows that Brennan tried to destroy us out of petty spite." They hired a lawyer from the next town over, a sharp-eyed woman named Margaret Keller who specialized in business disputes. She reviewed the complaints and assured them that they had a strong case, but warned that the process would be slow. The council met only once a month, and Brennan was clearly dragging things out as much as possible. "He wants you to give up," Margaret said bluntly. "He is counting on you getting discouraged and walking away. Do not give him the satisfaction." The investigation dragged into September, then October. They could not work on new projects, but they could maintain the property and complete the jobs they had already started. The merchant barge was finished and delivered, and they used that payment to cover the legal fees and the lease. Money was tight, tighter than Lira had ever experienced, and she lay awake at night doing calculations in her head, trying to figure out how much longer they could hold on. Felix was a rock through all of it, refusing to let discouragement take hold. He spent his free time designing new boats, planning for the future, keeping his hands busy even when they could not build. And he insisted they keep their wedding plans, refusing to let Brennan's machinations steal that joy from them. "We are getting married as planned," he said firmly when Lira suggested postponing. "This is our life, and we are going to celebrate it regardless of what some petty merchant tries to do. We will figure out the rest, but we are not putting our lives on hold." So on the first Saturday in October, with the leaves turning gold and red in the hills above the lake, they were married on the dock outside the boatworks. Felix's parents came, along with Gideon and his wife, Thomas Reid and his family, Old Whitley, Margaret Keller, and a handful of other friends they had made in town. It was a small gathering, but it was warm and genuine, and when the minister pronounced them married and Felix kissed her in the golden sunset light, Lira felt like she might burst with happiness. They held the celebration at the tavern as planned, and if some of the townsfolk gave them strange looks or made pointed comments, Lira barely noticed. She was too busy dancing with her husband, laughing at his terrible jokes, feeling the support of the people who had chosen to stand with them. Late in the evening, when most of the guests had gone home and only the closest few remained, Gideon stood and raised his glass. "I want to say something, if I may. I have known Felix for 3 years now, taught him most of what he knows about boats, watched him grow from an eager apprentice into a skilled craftsman. And in all that time, I never saw him as focused or as happy as he has been since he partnered with Lira. You two are good for each other, good for this town, and anyone who cannot see that is a fool. So here is to the newlyweds, and to the finest boat works Crescent Harbor has ever seen. May you build 1,000 boats and live to see every one of them sail." "Hear, hear," the others echoed, drinking deep. Felix squeezed Lira's hand under the table, his eyes suspiciously bright. When the toasts were done and the last guests had departed, they walked back to the boatworks together, to the small cottage they had been fixing up behind the work shed. It was not much yet, just 2 rooms and a loft, but it was theirs, bought with their savings and improved by their own hands. That night, lying in their bed with Felix's arms around her, Lira felt something shift inside her. The fear and uncertainty that had plagued her for so long began to ease. Whatever came next, they would face it together. That was what marriage meant, what partnership meant. Not the absence of struggle, but the presence of someone who would stand beside you through it all. The town council hearing was scheduled for the second Monday in October. Lira and Felix arrived early, dressed in their best clothes, with Margaret Keller beside them, and a folder full of documentation proving their compliance with every municipal code. The council chambers were packed, word having spread that there would be a confrontation between the new boatworks and Horace Brennan. Brennan was there with his own lawyer, a slick man in expensive clothes who presented the complaints with theatrical flair. He made the boatworks sound like a public nuisance, a threat to the town's reputation and waterfront integrity. He implied, without quite stating directly, that having an orc as a business owner set a dangerous precedent. Then it was Margaret's turn. She dismantled each complaint methodically, presenting their business license, their lease agreement, testimony from neighbors attesting that the noise was minimal and within normal bounds, documentation of their compliance with every waterfront regulation. She called Gideon as a witness to speak to the quality of their work and their professionalism. She called Thomas Reed to talk about his satisfaction with the boat they had built. And then she called old Samuel Whitley. "I have owned that property for 40 years, Whitley said, addressing the council directly. "I have seen half a dozen businesses try to make a go of it there, and most lasted less than a year. Then Felix and Lira came to me with their plan, and I saw something different. I saw two young people willing to work hard, willing to invest everything they had, willing to take a risk on each other and on this town. And I will tell you, in the 3 months they have had that lease, they have done more to improve the property than any previous tenant ever did. They built one boat so far, and it is the finest fishing vessel I have seen in decades. They are good for my property, good for the waterfront, and good for Crescent Harbor. These complaints are nothing more than harassment from a man who wanted the land for himself, and is upset that he did not get it." The council deliberated for less than an hour before dismissing all of Brennan's complaints and reinstating the boatworks business license. Brennan left the chamber in a fury, his lawyer on his heels, but Lira barely noticed. She was too busy hugging Margaret, thanking Whitley, accepting congratulations from the people who had come to support them. "It is over," Felix said, pulling her close once they were outside. "We won. The business is ours, free and clear. For now," Lira said, still cautious despite the victory. "Brennan will not give up that easily." But Felix was right that the immediate threat had passed. With their license restored, they could take on new work, and the publicity from the council hearing had actually generated more interest in their services. By the end of October, they had 5 projects lined up, more than they could handle alone. "We need to hire help," Felix said, looking at the list of commissions with a mixture of excitement and anxiety. "At least one more person, maybe 2 if we want to keep up with demand." They put out word that they were hiring, and to Lira's surprise, they received over a dozen applications. Most were from young men looking to learn the boat-building trade. But there was also a dwarf woman named Nora Stonefist who had experience in ship carpentry, and a middle-aged human man named Marcus Wells, who had been a fisherman until an injury forced him into lighter work. They interviewed everyone carefully and ultimately hired both Marcus and Nora. Marcus would handle repairs and maintenance, the steady work that kept income flowing, while Nora would assist with new construction, her strength and expertise complementing their skills. With a crew of 4, they could take on multiple projects simultaneously, and the business began to truly thrive. Winter came early that year, the lake icing over in late November. Boat work slowed, as it always did in the cold months, but they used the time to plan and prepare. Felix designed a new class of fishing boat, incorporating improvements based on feedback from Thomas Reed and other fishermen. Lira worked on expanding their workshop, building additional workbenches and storage. Marcus and Nora proved to be excellent additions, skilled and reliable, fitting seamlessly into the operation. And through it all, Lira and Felix built their life together. They finished work on the cottage, adding a proper kitchen and a second bedroom for eventual future use. They developed routines and rhythms, learning each other's habits, navigating the small disagreements and adjustments that came with marriage. Some days were harder than others, the stress of running a business testing their patience, but they always came back to the fundamental truth that they were stronger together than apart. In February, Felix surprised her with a carved sign for the boatworks, the project he had been working on in secret for months. It was beautiful, the letters deep and clean, shellacked to a high gloss. Landry and Owens Boat Works, it read, her name first despite her protests, and below that in smaller letters. Established 1284 Crescent Harbor. They hung it above the door to the works shed on a bright winter morning, and Lira stood staring at it for a long time, seeing her name displayed proudly for all the world to see. It was terrifying and exhilarating and deeply right. "Our names together," Felix said, standing beside her. "Forever, or at least until the wood rots, which I estimate will be about 200 years given the quality of the shellacking." She laughed and kissed him, there in front of the shop with anyone passing by able to see, and did not care who might be watching. Spring arrived with a rush of new growth and new business. The ice melted from the lake, and boats that had been in storage all winter needed maintenance and repairs. The commissions they had lined up in the fall came due, and they threw themselves into the work with renewed energy. They built 2 fishing boats, repaired a barge, and started construction on a pleasure yacht for a wealthy merchant from the capital, their largest and most prestigious commission yet. The town's attitude toward them continued to evolve. There were still those who disapproved, who would never accept an orc woman as a legitimate business owner or the partnership between her and Felix as anything other than unnatural. But they were increasingly in the minority. Most people had come to respect the quality of their work, the fairness of their prices, the way they treated customers and employees with equal respect. And there were victories, small but significant. The baker who had previously refused to serve Lira began greeting her by name and setting aside the good bread for her. The harbor master, initially skeptical, started sending customers their way. Children played near the workshop without fear, and more than once Lira found small groups of young people watching them work, fascinated by the process of boat building. One warm afternoon in late May, as Lira was fitting planks on the yacht's hull, a young orc woman appeared at the edge of the property. She looked to be perhaps 19 or 20, with the uncertain bearing of someone venturing into unfamiliar territory. "Excuse me," the woman called out. "Is this the Landry and Owens Boat Works?" Lira set down her tools and walked over, surprised. She had not seen another orc in Crescent Harbor since she arrived years ago. "Yes, can I help you?" "I am looking for Lira Landry. I heard she runs this business." "I am Lira." The young woman's face lit up. "Really? You are the one everyone talks about, the orc who partnered with a human and built a successful business." "I suppose so, yes." Lira was not quite sure how to respond. "What is your name, Kara Longstrider?" "I am from the settlement in the North Hills, but I am thinking of leaving, trying to make my own way in the human towns. Everyone says it is impossible, that orcs cannot succeed in human business, but then I heard about you." She looked around the boatworks, taking in the workshop, the dock, the half-finished yacht. "You proved them wrong." Something in the girl's hopeful expression reminded Lira of herself 4 years ago, arriving in Crescent Harbor with nothing but determination and fear. "It was not easy," she said honestly. "There were many people who did not want me to succeed, who saw my presence as a threat or an insult. There are still people who feel that way. But you did it anyway. I did it with help. With a partner who believed in me, with customers who were willing to give me a chance, with time and patience and a great deal of hard work." She studied the young woman. "What do you want to do?" "I am good with numbers, with accounting and records." "I thought maybe I could find work as a clerk or bookkeeper, but no one in the settlement needs those skills, and I do not want to spend my life tanning hides and hauling water." "What do you need to do to leave the settlement? Is there some prohibition?" No, but it is frowned upon. Seen as a rejection of our ways, a desire to be something I am not. But I am not rejecting anything. I just want more choices than the settlement can offer. Kara's voice was earnest, almost pleading. You understand that, do you not? I do. Lira made a decision, one she hoped Felix would support. We could use a bookkeeper here. Someone to manage the accounts, track inventory, handle the business side so Felix and I can focus on the actual boat building. The pay is not huge, not yet, but it is steady and you would be learning a valuable trade. Kara's eyes went wide. You would hire me. Just like that. Not just like that. You would need to prove you have the skills you claim and you would be on trial for the first month. But yes, if you are serious about this, I will give you a chance. Someone gave me one once. I think I should pass that forward. The girl looked like she might cry. Thank you. Thank you so much. When can I start? Tomorrow, if you are ready. Bring any references or examples of your work that you have. Kara promised to return the next morning and left walking on air. Lira watched her go, then turned to find Felix standing behind her, smiling. That was a good thing you just did, he said. I hope you agree with the decision. I probably should have consulted you first. We need a bookkeeper, and you saw something in her that you recognized. That is what being a business owner means, making those calls. Besides, I trust your judgment. He slipped his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. You are going to change that girl's life, you know, the way Crescent Harbor changed yours. The way you changed mine, she corrected softly. We changed each other. That is what love does. Kara proved to be as skilled as she claimed, and within 2 weeks she had organized their chaotic record, keeping into a system that actually made sense. She was shy at first, uncertain in the human town, but she watched the way Lira moved through the world and slowly began to find her own confidence. By midsummer, she was living in a rented room above the tavern and had made friends among the younger people in town. The yacht was completed in July, a beautiful craft with graceful lines and exquisite detailing. The merchant who had commissioned it was effusive in his praise and paid them a bonus on top of the agreed price. He also spread word about their work in the capital, and within a month they had inquiries from 3 more wealthy clients interested in custom boats. We are going to need more space, Felix said, looking at the workshop that was bursting at the seams with projects. And probably more employees. This is growing faster than I ever imagined. They approached Whitley about expanding the lease to include the empty building next door, and the old man agreed readily, pleased by their success. They hired 2 more workers, both young men eager to learn the trade, and began construction on the expansion. By autumn, they had doubled their workspace and were taking on commissions 6 months in advance. The business was thriving, but more than that, Lira realized she was happy. Truly, deeply happy in a way she had never imagined possible. She had work she loved, people who respected her, a home and a husband and a life that felt solid and real. The fear and uncertainty that had defined her early years in Crescent Harbor had faded, replaced by a quiet confidence. One evening in late September, a year almost to the day since they had been married, Felix found her sitting on their dock watching the sunset paint the lake in shades of fire. "Penny for your thoughts," he said, settling beside her. "I was thinking about the day you asked me to be your partner. How terrified I was, how certain I was that it would end in disaster." She leaned against him, feeling the solid warmth of his presence. "I almost said no, did you know that? I almost let fear win. I knew. I saw it in your face, the way you were looking for an escape, a reason to refuse. I thought I had lost before I even began. What would you have done if I had said no? Probably pined dramatically for a few months, then eventually convinced myself to move on. Though knowing me, I would have ended up as one of those tragic figures who builds boats alone and sighs a lot. She elbowed him gently. You are ridiculous. You love me anyway. I do. She turned to face him more fully. Felix, I want to tell you something. I have loved you from almost the first moment I met you, but I did not know how to believe that you might love me back. I spent 2 years convinced I was alone in my feelings, that the best I could hope for was proximity. And then you asked me to partner with you, and you told me you loved me, and my entire world changed. You gave me everything I had been too afraid to hope for. You gave me the same, he said softly. I watched you for 2 years, loving you from a distance, thinking I had no chance. The day I finally found the courage to ask you to partner with me was the most terrified I have ever been in my life. And when you said yes, when I realized you felt the same, it was like the sun coming out after years of rain. We were both loving each other in silence, she marveled. All that time, both of us too afraid to speak. But we found our way to each other anyway. Sometimes I think the silence made the speaking sweeter, made us more sure when we finally took the leap. They sat together as the stars came out, talking about the year that had passed and the years ahead. They discussed expanding the business further, maybe eventually buying the property outright. They talked about the possibility of children someday, though both agreed they were not quite ready for that step. They made plans and dreamed aloud, secure in the knowledge that whatever came, they would face it together. In October, the town held its annual Harvest Festival, and for the first time, Landry and Owens Boat Works had a booth in the market square. They displayed sketches of their designs, miniature models of boats they had built, and answered questions from curious townsfolk. Lira had been nervous about being so visible, so exposed, but the response was overwhelmingly positive. People congratulated them on their success, shared stories about boats they had commissioned or repaired, brought their children to meet the famous Orc boat ride. Late in the day, as the festival was winding down, Mayor Aldridge himself stopped by their booth. He was an older man, conservative and traditional, and Lira had always assumed he disapproved of their partnership. Landry, Owens, he greeted them formally. I wanted to tell you personally that you have been a credit to Crescent Harbor. When you first opened your boat works, I will admit I had doubts. But you have proven yourselves through quality work and fair dealing, and you have brought business and prestige to our town. I am proud to have you as residents. He shook both their hands and moved on, leaving them slightly stunned. Did that just happen? Felix asked. I think we just received the mayor's official approval, Lira said, bemused. I am not sure how to feel about that. Feel victorious, feel validated, feel like we have definitively proven all the doubters wrong, he grinned at her, or just feel smug. I think smug is appropriate. They packed up the booth as the sun set, carrying their displays back to the workshop. As they walked through the town, Lira noticed the way people greeted them, the respect and warmth in their voices. She saw Kara laughing with a group of young people near the tavern, clearly comfortable and happy. She saw the sign above their workshop door, their names together, proclaiming their partnership to the world. And she thought about that day a year ago when Felix had asked her to be his partner, his unexpected question that had changed everything. He had offered her more than a business opportunity. He had offered her a future, a place to belong, a way to be seen and valued for who she truly was. And in accepting, in taking that leap of faith together, they had built something extraordinary, not just a business, though the business thrived. Not just a marriage, though their love ran deep and true. But a life, full and rich and real, built on trust and hope, and the courage to believe that they could be more together than they ever were apart. The winter that followed was mild, and they spent the quiet months working on a special project. Together they designed and built a small sailboat, sleek and fast, meant for pleasure rather than work. They christened her Starling's Song in honor of their first commission, and on the first warm day of spring they took her out on the lake together. Lira sat in the bow while Felix handled the sail, and they skimmed across the water with the wind in their faces and the sun warm on their backs. The shore receded behind them, and for a while there was nothing but the two of them and the boat they had built and the endless blue of the sky above. "This is perfect," Felix called from the stern. "This moment right here, I want to remember it forever." "Then we will have to come back often," Lira called back. "Build the memory over and over until we are old and gray and can barely climb into the boat anymore. Deal?" "Though knowing us, we will probably still be building boats when we are 90, competing over who can make the finest dovetail joints with our arthritic fingers." She laughed, the sound carrying across the water, and felt something settle deep in her chest. This was home. Not the cottage, not the workshop, not even the town itself, but this. The two of them together, building and dreaming and facing the world as partners. They sailed until the sun began to sink toward the western hills, then reluctantly turned back toward shore. As they approached the dock, Lira saw a small crowd had gathered. Marcus and Nora were there, along with Kara and Gideon, and old Whitley was leaning on his cane at the edge of the wharf. "What is all this?" Felix asked as they tied off the boat. "We thought Starling's Song deserved a proper christening," Gideon said, holding up a bottle. "The first boat you built just for yourselves, not for a customer. That is worth celebrating." They gathered on the dock as the sun set in glorious colors, and Gideon smashed the bottle against the boat's bow, declaring her blessed and fit for 1,000 journeys. Everyone cheered and clapped, and someone produced food and drink, and the impromptu celebration stretched into the evening. Lira stood with Felix's arm around her, watching their friends and employees laugh and talk, and felt a swell of gratitude so intense it nearly overwhelmed her. She had come to Crescent Harbor alone and afraid, certain she would never truly belong. And now she was surrounded by people who cared about her, who celebrated her successes, who had chosen to be part of her life. "Thank you," she said quietly to Felix. "For what?" "For asking me to be your partner, for giving me the courage to say yes, for loving me when I thought I was unlovable. For building this life with me." He pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to her temple. "You did just as much as I did. More, probably. You took the bigger risk, made the harder choice. I just had the good sense to recognize an extraordinary woman when I saw one." "We were both brave," she said. "We both took the leap. And we both landed safely." He gestured at the scene around them, the celebration, the business they had built, the life they shared. "Look at what we made, Lira. Look at what happens when you trust someone enough to take the risk." She looked, and she saw not just what they had built, but what they were still building, would continue to build for decades to come. Every boat they crafted together was a testament to their partnership. Every challenge they overcame strengthened the foundation. Every moment of joy or struggle or mundane daily living wove another thread into the tapestry of their shared life. The party wound down eventually, people drifting home in twos and threes until only Lira and Felix remained on the dock. The lake was calm under the stars, reflecting the light like scattered diamonds. In the distance they could see the lights of the town, warm and welcoming, and closer by the workshop stood dark and solid, waiting for tomorrow's work. "Ready to go home?" Felix asked. "Yes." She took his hand, their fingers intertwining in the gesture that had become second nature. "Let us go home." They walked back to the cottage together, and Lira thought about all the evenings they had walked this same path, all the conversations and silences, all the small moments that added up to a life. and she thought about the evenings still to come, years and decades of them, stretching out like the lake itself, vast and full of possibility. Inside the cottage, Felix built up the fire while Lira set out a simple supper. They ate at the small table they had built together, talking about the next day's work, about the commissions waiting to be filled, about the ordinary details of their shared existence. And in the ordinariness, in the comfortable rhythm of it, Lira found the deepest satisfaction. This was what she had longed for without knowing it, all those years when she was alone. Not grand gestures or dramatic declarations, though those had their place, but this daily choosing, this steady presence, this knowledge that someone else was walking beside her through all of it. Later, lying in bed with Felix's breathing soft and even beside her, Lira let herself think back to that moment a year ago when he had asked her to be his partner. She remembered the fear that had nearly made her refuse, the caution that had almost stolen this entire future from both of them. And she was grateful, so deeply grateful that she had found the courage to say yes. His unexpected question had changed everything, but it was the answer, her answer, their shared answer, that had built the life they now lived. The question had opened the door, but they had walked through it together, hand in hand, and made something beautiful on the other side. She fell asleep with a smile on her face, secure in the knowledge that tomorrow would bring more of the same, honest work, genuine partnership, and the quiet joy of a life built with someone she loved. It was more than enough. It was everything. And in the morning, when they woke and dressed and walked to the workshop together, when they began the day's work side by side, each understanding their role and trusting the other completely, Lira knew with absolute certainty that this was only the beginning. They had decades ahead of them, boats to build and challenges to face and dreams to pursue. They would grow old together in this town by the lake, and someday people would tell stories about the orc woman and the human man who had loved each other enough to take the risk, who had built something lasting not just with wood and skill but with trust and courage and hope. The sign above their door would weather and fade over the years, but the truth it proclaimed would only grow stronger. Landry and Owens, partners in all things, their names forever linked in the memory of Crescent Harbor and in the boats that would sail these waters long after they were gone. It was a good story, Lira thought. A true story. A story that had begun with silence and fear and secret longing and had become something brave and bright and beautiful, and it was only just beginning,